Here's how verse 1 starts right off. We're just going to kick right into this. Chapter 5, verse 1 says this. So James writes, and he says, "Come now, you rich people, weep and wail over the miseries that are coming upon you," or coming on you. That's how he starts. Now, let's kind of pause here just for a moment, because this is interesting. Because usually James says, "Hey, brothers, listen to me. Hey, brothers and sisters, lend an ear. Hey, brother, just hear this." And this time he just flats out and says, "You rich people, weep and wail." And it's good to kind of take a moment and just, we've covered this in the past, but not all of us were here for that. So I just want to reiterate this again, that in Scripture there appears to be 4 categories of people regarding income. And I know we live in a society where we have 3. We have lower class, middle class, and upper class. In Scripture, there's 4. Okay, and it tends to look something a little bit like this. You have your righteous rich. Okay, you have your people that are godly people and they're wealthy. They have lots of income, they have lots of assets, they have access to a lot of things, and they love God with it, and they're generous with it, and they're constantly giving, and they're worshiping with it, and they're great stewards with it. Okay, so they're the righteous rich. There also within Scripture appears to be the unrighteous rich. These are the people that cheat and steal to get money. These are the people that hoard. These are the people that say that they're the Scrooge McDucks. I got to have all this money piling up. I'm not going to give it. I'm not going to be generous. I'm not worshiping God with it. I'm not serving God with it. It's mine. I have it. It's my precious. And they are the unrighteous rich. Okay, they're the unrighteous rich. Then there are the righteous poor. The righteous poor. These are people who don't have income, or there's very minimal. They do work, and they work as hard as they can. Their income doesn't meet their expenses or barely meets it. And they just don't have access to a lot of things. But they are faithful with what they have. They still work. They're not idle. They're not lazy. They're working, and they're working in a godly way, but they're not being bad stewards. They're not gambling. They're not using drugs. They're not getting drunk. They're really being faithful with what they have, and they're just doing everything they can to worship God with what they've been given, and they're content where they are. Okay, so that's the righteous poor. Then there are the unrighteous poor. These are those that have limited income or no income, but they're lazy. They're not working. They go months without even looking for a job. They don't have resumes out. They are the ones that if they do get some money in, it goes to selfish things, whether it's video games, whether it's drugs, alcohol, gambling, whatever the case may be. They're unfaithful with their stuff. They're not generous. They don't give. They don't serve. Okay, they're the unrighteous poor. And what we have within Scripture then, as you see this, it's not that the rich are better than the poor. Do you see how I have the graph laid out? The goal is not rich or poorness. It's not poverty gospel. If we live, our sons of the King, we need to live like princes, and if you're faithful to God, He'll give you money, blah, blah, blah. It's not that. It's also not poverty gospel, that if you're going to be godly, you got to have nothing and sell everything, live on a hilltop, don't shave, don't wear deodorant, and let's just wait for the kumbaya Lord to come. Okay, it's not that either. The goal is not rich. The goal is not poor. The goal is righteousness. The goal is to be godly, whether you're rich, whether you're poor. Okay, that's the goal, is godliness. So that's why I have it here where it's not the rich over the poor. It's righteousness over unrighteousness, and that the rich and the poor are equal. Okay, so that's kind of the goal here. Now, when James is starting off by yelling out, "You rich people," and he's saying, "You are prepare for misery," the odds are he is talking about which category here? The unrighteous rich. Good. So you're following this well. Awesome. So the odds are he is talking about the unrighteous rich. Because if they were the righteous rich, they wouldn't need any type of warning. Because they're being godly and they're doing great things with what they've been given. But since James is about to tell them that everything they got is going to be worthless and they got hellfire to come, and he uses eschatological end times type language here, it means that he is warning them about hellfire, about judgment, which means they're not being righteous with the wealth they have, but they're being unrighteous. And we're even going to find in just a few verses that people are working. What seems to be the righteous poor are working for the unrighteous rich, and then the unrighteous rich are saying, "We like our money, so we're not going to give the righteous poor their paychecks. You've done the job, but we're not writing you a paycheck." We're just going to hold on to it for a while and wait till some dividends come in and wait till some stocks divide and appreciate. And we're just going to wait for a while. So you'll get paid, but later. Okay, and so now the money is crying out to God, saying we're not being used properly. And the poor are crying out to God, I worked a 12-hour day all week. I went home and now I have no food to give my family. I have nothing to show for it. Oh God, what are we supposed to do? And God's hearing the cries. And so James is warning the unrighteous rich. You have no idea the wrath is coming down upon you because you are not properly using that which you have access to. Okay, so that's what we're going to be looking at in James 5. And here's where it gets difficult for us in American society. Because we look at a chart like this, and then we inadequately place ourselves in categories. We judge ourselves inappropriately. We say maybe something like, well, yeah, I'm in the righteous poor category, or I'm in the righteous rich category, because I have all this stuff that I plan on being generous with. I got all this stuff. I got it saved up. It's right here. I plan on giving this to these people and this to those people. But what's really happening is it's not going anywhere. And it's sitting there in your house, sitting there in your apartment, not going anywhere, not being given to anyone. It has all these intentions. But all those intentions mean nothing if there's no action. Hence, faith without works is dead, as James said earlier. So therefore, it's not that you're in the righteous category. You're actually in the unrighteous category because there it sits collecting dust, molding, rusting, whatever. Okay, and some people will say they're in the poor category when in reality they're in the rich category. They just call themselves poor because they have access to not as much as other people. And they think that makes them poor just because they're poorer than someone else. But that's not how James looks at poorness. It doesn't look at it from an American sliding scale. America tends to look at poorness based upon poverty, and that's based upon an annual income per how many people are living within the household. And if you fall under a certain line, then you're considered poverty. But are you really still poor? Because then if you're in poverty, you get different food stamps and bridge cards and all these things and access still to lots and lots of food and lots of things. So is that still considered poor? Because James looks at poor as you don't have access to anything. Okay, as a matter of fact, most people, they live in an apartment or in a trailer or in a house. And within either of those, even in the smallest, dingiest of apartments, what you have within the apartment is maybe even something kind of like what I'm standing in here. You might have a living room, a closet, then you have a kitchen, and maybe a bedroom. And then usually within that, you have another closet. Right? So you have multiple things within this one bedroom small apartment. Even if you have a studio apartment, it's still a pretty big room that still has a toilet off, a bathroom by itself, and its own little separate room with a closet still there. It's just the bedroom, the living room, and the kitchen are kind of open in one area. But you still have other rooms. You still have a place where the bathroom is at. And when you look at James, you look at people in the Bible times, and James says, hey, here's what poor people are. The poor people of the Bible times tend to live in a place where there is just one room. And that's it. And it's a small room, and that's where everybody is. That's where they sleep, it's where they eat, and it's where they go to the bathroom in the jar in the corner in the same room. And the reason why you go into the bathroom in the jar in the corner with all your family there in the room with you is because that is more private than going outside where you got 100 people walking around. Okay, so shy bladder did not exist back then, and they had dirt floors, no furniture. Okay, that's what they had. In fact, I got to experience this. What I'm trying to do for us is to get a perspective shift, just ever so slightly. And I got to experience this when I went to India. Because while I was in India, I got to visit the slums. And in the slums of India is actually one of the poorest places on the planet. Because you have some of the poorest countries are India, and you get some places within the continent of Africa, you get some and in Ethiopia areas, you get some very poor people. And what makes India so unique and why it's usually placed as the number one poorest place on the planet is because within India, in the same city where the slums are, you also have cities with more technology and more advancement than what Grand Rapids has ever dreamed, let alone experienced. Okay, so you got Microsoft does their research facilities in Delhi, India, and they have robotic equipment, and they got cell phone technology. They had razor phones and all that type of stuff a year before we even knew it existed. because they're testing it there, and then they bring it here. So they all got it first, and they got robotic technology first, and they're the ones in there that have that got the retina laser surgery stuff first, and they got 3D printers over there to be able to print spinal vertebrae that they just surgically installed in somebody in China recently, and they have that technology in India. Okay, so India has the top technology in the world, and there's people that live like in Bible times. Okay, so they got these places, whereas all these are individual homes that are just one room. That's all people have. Okay, and then when you filled up your jar, this wetness here, that's where you dump the jar, right in the middle of the street. You got done filling your jar, you go outside and you dump it. And then you walk through it because it's warmer than what the weather is. So it keeps your feet warm because you don't have socks. Okay, and so while I was there, I got the opportunity to preach at, just me preaching at the underground church because Christianity is not legal there. So there's an underground churches all over the place. I got to preach there. I got to see the Sunday school class that was there. They knew I was coming. It was in December. So they decided that they want to really celebrate Christmas with me because they know that Christmas is important in America. So the kids and the teachers went outside. They found a random branch and a bunch of trash, and they tried cutting around it and playing with it, and they made a Christmas tree for me to be able to sing with them at. And I mean, this is what life was like there. It is the poorest of the poor. Okay, and you don't even see half the decorations where they found some used condoms they blew up, and I mean, it was just horrible, okay? It was trash, and this was just the nicest of the nice that they had, and the kids were so excited, because they never get that, okay? So that was their life, and so I wonder what it would be like if we were to take someone from the slums and move them to where we are today, or if we took someone from the Bible times, and we brought them to here today, if we were to warp them in time. Okay, so I wonder what that would be like. It would almost be like someone would come and they would be like going into our house and they would say, hey, look, there's a kitchen here. What's this room? What's this room all about? And we'd be like, oh, well, that's our kitchen. A kitchen? What's that big white box right there? Oh, that big white box, that's our refrigerator. Really? What's that for? Well, that's where we keep our food that has it at a temperature that we prefer. You have food? Like you just have food available just sitting there. And what's all those boxes all around that refrigerator? Oh, well, those are cabinets. What's in the cabinets? Well, more food. I mean, you have extra food? Like you're going to eat all that today? Oh, no, that's for like tomorrow, maybe next week when I get around to eating it. Really? Where do you get all this food at? Well, we get it at the store that's right up the road that has lots of food within the store. And when you go to some of those areas, there is no store. There is no food store. You don't go buying food like it just doesn't exist. You either hunted the food down or you went to a neighbor that might have a cow that they're slaughtering, but it's only if you can afford to even buy. There's just no food, let alone canned food. So they'd be like, really? Wow, that's amazing. Then they'd come over here and they'd be like, what's this? And we'd be like, well, that's our sofa. You don't have to sit on the floor, on the dirt where the scorpions and the spiders are. Man, this is nice. This is really, what's that box that is pointed at? And that's our television. Television? What's a television? Then they'd be amazed. You mean you have endless entertainment 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on multiple channels and multiple languages? Wow. What do you mean there's nothing on? Is it broke? You mean you have so much entertainment you're bored with it? Oh my gosh. And then they'd be like looking around thinking, well, what's this room back here? You got a little white chair with a hole in it. What's that all about? Well, that's our magical chair. You put stuff in it you don't want, and it makes it magically disappear. And they're like, wow, this is the coolest place ever. You got multiple rooms. You got food that lasts weeks. You got chair that makes stuff disappear. You got soft, fluffy things and endless entertainment like the kings only had access to, with jesters and jokers and all this stuff and bands, and only they had access to that. You mean to tell me that you have all this stuff? And by the way, I'm talking about stuff people with poverty have. Okay, people with poverty have a television with a DVD player, when they have a fridge, and they have food in their cabinets, and they got food in there for people in poverty have access to that. Okay, I'm not talking about anything that's of luxury that we would consider that only the rich people. I'm not talking about robotic servants or talking windows or anything like that. I'm talking about just the stuff that the poverty people have, and they call themselves poor, and James would go, this is what kings had back then. Okay, this is just amazing. You know, it would be like, well, do you have the vehicle that you transport? Some of the poor people will say, well, no, I don't have a car. I can't afford a car. So I ride on a $250,000 bus driven by somebody else. That's how I get around. Somebody else drives me around, so I don't have to worry about the traffic and the laws and everything. And it's a fancy bus. It's not on the back end of a camel that poops all the time and spits and grunts. Okay, I'm riding in a $250,000 bus. That's what we have in our city. Okay, we got these. It's just, we need a perspective shift. What is it we have access to? And what are we doing with what we have access to? Because we all have access to so much. James would look at the poorest person in our church and say, you're wealthy. You live like a king. That's what he would say. That's what it would be like. And we would have to go to places like Mel Trotter or Salvation's Army or Dégagé Ministries or Guiding Light Missions in order to find people that are really in a poor-like situation. And there we would find people that are the unrighteous poor, and we would find people that are the righteous poor. And we would need to minister to both. Okay, that's where we would have to go to find that. But we could not put ourselves into that category. But we would. A lot of us would. If I just put the 4 boxes on the score, on the board, and I would say, everybody write down where you are, we would have several people that would say, righteous poor. When in reality, it's going to be in the rich category and might even be the unrighteous rich category. It wouldn't be in the upper right, it'd be in the lower left, depending on how things are going. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at the next several verses in chapter 5, and we're going to see how James expects people to do with that which they have been given. Because that which you have access to. It's not about that you don't have as much as somebody else. There's always somebody who has more, and there's always somebody who has less. The goal is not how much you have or what you have access to. The goal is going to be, what do you do with it? What do you do with that which you have access to? So James continues on in verse 2. Your wealth is ruined, and your clothes are moth-eaten. In other words, you got so much stuff that is just sitting there collecting, not being used for anything, and even moths are now getting fat off of you. Congratulations. Okay, your stuff are moth-eaten. Your silver and gold are corroded, which is interesting because silver and gold doesn't corrode, doesn't rust like that, which means that, you know what tarnish is? It doesn't rust like what this word corroded means. It means to rust. And so what James is getting at here is about an end times eschatological type judgment here. He is saying that all your wealth that you've saved, all this gold, all this stuff, is as valuable as rusted metal because in the end, it means nothing. You've saved it up, you got yourself all this great portfolio, all this gold, but when judgment comes and Jesus asks, what did you do with what I have given you? All this stuff is going to be considered like rusted metal. It's like a clunker of a car with no engine sitting out in the yard collecting rust. That's what your gold is worth. Okay, so that's why James uses the rusting regarding silver and gold. It's an end times type judgment description here. And so he says, and their corrosion will be a witness against you. Okay, it's going to be a witness against you that you didn't use it, you didn't take advantage of it, you weren't stewards with it, you didn't serve the kingdom with it. It's a witness against you and will eat your flesh like fire. Isn't that just lovely? Okay, this is like a judgment hellfire type description here. This is all about end times type point of view. You stored up treasures in when? The last days. Okay, Jesus is going to be coming again soon, and you're worried about how much treasure you have. That's James's point of view here. Okay, so what this does is this brings us to the discussion of hospitality. I had told you we're going to do the opposite flip side of the coin with this discussion. And so this is the opposite flip side of the coin here, is an issue of hospitality. And by hospitality, it is simply defined as helping people flourish in the space provided for them. So if you're going to be hospitable, that means you have a place and you allow people to exist for time within that place and you provide for them there. Okay, that's hospitality. And by hospitality, it does not mean you're providing Burger King, McDonald's, KFC, or anything like that. It means you are really giving them a good meal. You are sacrificing yourself to help them flourish. Also known as Luther's theology of the cross. Also known as our church motto. Okay, sacrificing self to help others flourish. That's that hospitality. And so hospitality means that you bring people into your place and you provide for them there. You provide for them what they need. You provide for them food. You provide for them clothing. You provide for them a place to sleep if they need it. And hospitality has implied within it the suggestion that it does not include family members. Okay, that if you have a sister who is visiting and you invite them into your home, you give them a place to eat and to sleep and you provide all that for them, you are being a godly sister or a godly brother, or you're being a godly parent or a godly family member, but that's not considered hospitality. Hospitality is where you bring somebody in who is not related to you. Okay, that's the idea of hospitality. It is someone from the church or someone from outside the church that's not related to you. Someone who is either a Christian or not a Christian, a missionary or a lost person, whatever the case may be, you're bringing them into your house and you're providing for them. That is hospitality. Whether it's somebody that is in absolute homeless need and you're trying to care for them, or if it's someone you're wanting to extend a friendship to, you bring them into your home and you be hospitable toward them. Okay, when Jesus met with Matthew, the IRS agent of the New Testament, and Matthew repented and became quitting his job and retired from that job. IRS isn't bad, it's just silly. No, it's an important job, it really is. But when Matthew stopped his cheating ways, when Matthew stopped his crooked ways, one of the first things Matthew did was express hospitality. He threw a party. He invited all his lost friends over, all his connections over, and then he brought Jesus in. And he said, okay, everyone, this is Jesus. He has changed my life. Let him change yours. Let's have a party. Let's break down some Jay-Z. Let's go ahead and get some bling going. Let's let our camels jump out back. Let's go and have a good time. And we're going to break bread, and we're going to eat steak, and we're going to talk to Jesus, and we're going to be ministered and possibly even redeemed by Jesus because Jesus rocks. Okay, and so what Matthew does is he provides, first thing, hospitality. That's the first thing he does. He brings non-family members in, and he provides for their needs. He gives them a place, he gives them food, gives them drinks, and gives them Jesus. Okay, that's the first thing Matthew does. So that's hospitality. So the question can then be asked is, how is your hospitality? Are you hospitable? Do you have a place where you sleep at night? Whether it's an apartment, whether it's a trailer, whether it's a house, if you have a place, are you hospitable with that place? Are you bringing people in? Are you inviting people over? And then if you say, well, I would, but my place is just so disorganized and it's trash and I got stuff here and stuff there. I couldn't bring people in because there's nowhere for them to be. Well, then what you got is an unrighteous rich problem. Because that means you got all this stuff set up for convenience to you, for your comfort, so that you can find it, but not for people to be shown hospitality to. So now you got this place you aren't using with stuff that's collecting dust. Okay, and you might say, well, I'm poor. Well, James would say you're unrighteous rich. Because you got a place with a living room and a bathroom, you got some canned goods in your cabinet, and you got stuff here and a TV and a DVD player, and you can bring people in. Let them sit. Let them talk with you. Give them some food. Let them crash on your couch for a night. Just provide for their needs. Talk to them about Jesus. Read for them scripture. Pray with them if they're struggling and hurting. You can do ministry right there in your home because you have a place to do ministry in. But we have a tendency to look at our place of residence as, this is my quiet zone. This is my bubble. I have a long day at work. I need a place to go down and to have quietness. And that's appropriate to have from time to time because Jesus himself did that. Although he usually went fishing. Okay, that's where he usually went to a mountaintop. He went for a walk around the block, essentially. He didn't just say that every night is my me time, a quiet time, so I can't let anybody in. I can't show hospitality because I'm either at work or I have me time. And if you might recall, Jesus' me time wasn't really as often as we get. He sacrificed a lot. The disciples sacrificed a lot. And James says that the people in the church need to start sacrificing more because they're not sacrificing a lot. So they need to have hospitality. You get me time. It's called the bathroom with the closed door. It's called sleeping at night. You get that. Take a shower in the morning. Power in the shower. Renew yourself. Me time. Now go to work. Come home. Be hospitable. And then go to bed. And you got yourself a full day. In fact, you find somebody who works full-time and they do ministry, you'll find out they don't have a lot of time to themselves. That's just what life looks like. And that's what the Christian life is supposed to look like. A good, full, satisfying life. Okay, so how is your hospitality? James continues onward. He goes on into verse 4, and he's going to talk about the issue regarding, contentment. He's going to talk about the opposite of contentment, but we're going to talk about contentment. He says this in verse 4 into the first part of verse 5. Look, the pay that you withheld from the workers who reaped your field cries out, and the outcry of the harvesters had reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived luxuriously on the land and have indulged yourselves. In other words, you got so much that you've brought in. You're not paying people appropriately. You're not spending things like appropriately. You're trying to cheat on your taxes. You're trying to keep money to yourselves, whatever the case may be, and you're just building yourselves up. You're just living a self-indulgent type of life. And so the question there then is are you content? And we have two extremes, and I want to get away from the extreme. I just want to say them so that we just get them out of our heads and try to get more to a practical level. We have different extremes. We have people who are in the jobs of ownership of businesses, and they hire people, and then they don't pay them. Or they try to say, you know what, why pay this person $10 an hour when I could go down toward the southern part of Texas, hire somebody for $2 an hour and get the same type of work and put that out there. And I could save myself all this money. And so then they cheat and they skimp their ways through. So there is that type of extreme. Then there's the other type of extreme where the people say, you know, I think I should be paid more, so I'm going to strike, I'm going to picket, I'm going to try to destroy the place I work and sabotage it because I don't think it's fair that they're not paying me more than they already are, even though I previously agreed to the amount that they're paying me. Okay, it's kind of messed up. And so you got two extremes that sometimes goes on there. And ultimately we have to ask ourselves, are we content? Can we really be satisfied with what we have? And I know parents that deny their kids certain things. They'll say, I won't provide for you clothing. I won't provide for you any type of academic stuff or anything for school. I'm not going to provide for our household by paying bills and utilities, but I'm going to go to the bar and buy a drink. You know, this is where the problem starts coming in. If you don't have money to pay your utilities, but you're going to the bar, there's a problem there. It's called the unrighteous rich category or the unrighteous poor, one or the other. Either you don't have it and you're using it unrighteously, or you really do have it, you're only using it for yourself. Either way, it's the unrighteous category, and either way, there's a lifestyle there that is called discontentment. I am not content unless I am able to buy for myself these things. I am not able to be content unless I am able to provide for myself certain things. And so we constantly are wandering around, our eyes chasing from one side to another, wondering what else we could provide ourselves with so that we can be more happy in life. And we think that those things are going to provide our happiness. And so the question then comes, how many of us are truly contented people? To which the honest reply would end up being something like, well, none of us, we're Americans. And Americans are not content people. We just aren't. Okay? Our founding of our nation is about discontentment. Whether for right or for wrong, ultimately that's what's going on, is we have a society, we have an entire ecosystem, entire ecology set up about discontentment. That's why we're always getting upgrades. That's why there's always new things coming out. That's why our labels of our products that we get for shampoo and carpets and everything else says new and improved. You know what? Are you saying it didn't work before? Well, now it works better. Okay, so why are you selling both? You know, and then we're looking for, well, I don't want just Facebook 1.16.1. I want Facebook 2.1.11.4. You see, I need to upgrade. Oh, look, my phone, it says you have an upgrade available. Well, I need my upgrade because it's new. You know, and I upgrade because I hate that stupid one that sits on my screen the whole time. It annoys me. But we constantly are wanting to upgrade. You know, we're wanting something that's new, something that's fresh, and we just think that this will make us happy. And so you ought to ask, have you ever thought, if I can just get, then I will be happy? Maybe it's if I could just get a new place to live, or a new car, or a different job, or if I could just get a different spouse or a spouse, then I will be happy. You know, some people, their discontentment is about what they're trying to get rid of. If I could just have less responsibility, if I could get a promotion, that means no manual labor anymore, and do this type of job instead, if my kids would just move out, then I will be happy. You know, and we are constantly putting our happiness in all these external things. And what was happening is we have not learned to be content with the lot we have been given. And if we're not content with the lot that we have been given, we're not going to be satisfied with it. And if we're not satisfied with it, we're not going to serve with it. And if we're not going to serve with it, we're not going to be faithful with it. And if we're not faithful with it, we just put ourselves into the unrighteous category. So we got to learn the issue of contentment. So how many people have actually been contented? How many of you have actually said to yourselves, not just maybe physical appearance. Let's start there. Let's just sit on this for a minute, just because it makes us all uncomfortable equally. Okay, so physical appearance. How many of you ever looked into a mirror and said, thank you, Lord, I have a head? Because when I consider life without one, this is pretty good. Okay, but then what tends to happen is we become discontented. We say, man, I wish I looked differently. I wish I was more skinny, or I wish I had more weight, or I wish I was taller. I wish I was shorter. I wish I had a chiseled chin. I wish I had a neck that a sweater could actually stay up. You know, I wish I had, you know, I wish I didn't look like an experimental chia pet. You know, I wish that, you know, I didn't look like I snorted a cat. You know, I wish that it's, you know, and we look with such great discontentment in that mirror. And we think, if I could just be, then I will be happy. Because I cannot be happy here. I cannot be happy as I am. And I'm not saying that for those that are obese to just be content in obesity and don't try to get yourself healthy. This is not an anti-health type thing. It is about, can you be satisfied where you are, as well as continue the route of pursuing things. Because here's the balance we have to play that's really difficult, is that we need to pursue growth, we need to pursue health and be good stewards of our body and our stuff, and we need to pursue that as well as be content with what we've got. And that's a balance. And what that looks like is we pursue better things so that we can better serve. We pursue better health so that we can better serve Christ, because it's hard to serve when you're sick all the time. It's hard to serve that when you go up 2 steps, you're out of breath. Okay, so we want to be able to be in shape to the best of our ability, to be as healthy as we possibly can, so that we can serve better with more endurance, with more perseverance, with more energy, and with more gusto. Okay, and we need to be content, meaning that we are happy with what we have been given and where we are at, and knowing that any other happiness that will come is because I can serve more, not because this thing is determinant of my happiness. That's the difference between the pursuit and also contentment. You see the difference there? Okay, so are we able to say, I am content with what I have been given? It's kind of like what Ecclesiastes said in chapter 3, for every season and every time. In other words, you know, sometimes your job, yes, it sucks. That's why they pay you to do it. Because if it didn't suck, you wouldn't have to get paid to do it. You would just freely do it because it's so much fun. Okay, so there's things about your job that sucks. Okay, so yes, there is an issue of potentially being able to say, I need to find a different job. And I'm not saying that God won't give you a different job. And I'm not saying that God won't give you a spouse if you're single. And I'm not saying that God won't give you, I'm not saying that that's not going to happen. I'm just saying that those things are not the determining factor of your happiness. And if you cannot be happy with what you have, you're not going to be able to serve with it, and you're not going to be able to be faithful with it. And if you can't be faithful with what you've got, you're not going to be faithful with what you're going to possibly get or try to get, because you haven't learned to be faithful to begin with. And faithful is a self-disciplining issue. It's a self-drive issue. And if we got to be faithful with what we've been given, and then if more comes into play, well, we'll be faithful with that because we've already practiced faithfulness. But if we're not being faithful and we're using our poverty or our discontentment as excuses, I can't serve because, I'm not going to be able to serve because, there's no way I can serve God this way because, and we have excuses, when we are given more, because it's not perfect, there's going to be reasons to be unfaithful there too. Because there's no such thing as perfection in this world. There is no perfect job. There is no perfect spouse, believe you me. Because I've come as close as you can get. And so is she. And just kidding. But there is no perfect kid. There is no perfect church, no perfect car, no perfect house, because everything begins to fall apart. Everything has imperfections. Everything has reasons for discontentment. So if we can't be faithful here, we're not going to be able to be faithful there. So we need that type of contentedness. That's what God wants from us. He wants us to look at what we've got, be hospitable with it. In other words, share it with people. Okay, share it with people. He wants us to be content with it, be happy with what we've got so that we can delight in the Lord where we are. Not say we can't delight in the Lord until. Okay, because that just means that God is means to an end, not the end itself. And then lastly, what James is going to look at here is the issue of stewardship versus ownership. Stewardship versus ownership. And he says this in verses 5 through 6. You have lived luxuriously on the land and have indulged yourselves. You have fattened your hearts for the day of slaughter. That's lovely. This is like he would probably use the example of a steer or a bull. I'm going to use the example of a chicken, because I think we can relate to it better. And what this first part means here, means that it's like a chicken in a chicken coop. What does a chicken do in a chicken coop? It walks around, clucks around, sees other chickens, maybe pecks at a few, eats at some seed, fattens itself up, maybe lays an egg or two, and goes to sleep. Okay, and what it's doing is it's living its life being a chicken. Okay, and eating and indulging and eating and indulging. And what's the future of that chicken? Deep fried in a bucket. Okay, that's the future of the chicken, is deep fried in a bucket. And what James is basically saying is, people of the church, individually, you're acting like chickens, and Kentucky Fried Chicken just called. And you don't have much time left. Remember earlier, he had said that your life is like a vapor, like a smoke in the wind. It's just here for a moment. It's like a candle that just went out, and you got that smoke, and it's there for a moment, and then it's gone. That's your life. It's just temporary. Slaughter is coming. The chicken pot pie company is coming. You may not want to be a pie, but it's coming. And all you're worried about is how much more you can shove into your gut? Is that really your concern, is how much more things you can get, how much more comfortable you can be? And so he's basically saying, church, you have become a chicken coop. And the slaughter truck is right down the highway. It's going to be here in the morning. And your complaint and your issue is about, I just want to be able to cluck around a little bit more. I just want to be able to flap my wings a little more. I just want some more comfort. And I just want some more me time. And he's like, the slaughter's coming. You have a chance to get away from the slaughter. You can do chicken run. Okay, you can just grab a bunch of chickens and you can just Hogan hero it, build yourself a plan, dig under the fence and go and be free and get away from the slaughter. It is possible. And you got to take as many chickens with you away from the slaughter, or just live in your environment, fatten your hearts, and then you'll get slaughtered with the rest of the chickens. And so he says, you have condemned. And then he pauses and says, no. Stronger word than that. You have murdered the righteous man. You have not just condemned. You basically, if you hoard it to yourself and you don't share it with anyone and you don't serve anyone, you have condemned the people that are in need and don't have access to. You have not provided for them. You have not shared with them. You have not shared Christ with them. Or if they do have Christ, if they are indeed a righteous man, you have still not met their needs. You have not shown that Christian brotherly and sisterly love. You have not shown hospitality. You have not delighted. You have not been content. And therefore, you have essentially condemned, no, murdered them. You might say, but I didn't put a gun to them. I didn't shoot them. I didn't stab them. I didn't do any of that. Well, they were hungry and you did not provide food and they starved. You contributed to their death. If nothing else, by not even showing love toward them, you are therefore, by not doing anything, showing hate toward them. And Jesus had said, James's oldest brother, had said that if you hate someone, you have murdered them. Hate in the heart is equal to murder, even though they're still walking and breathing. So by not showing love, you're therefore showing hate. You might say, but I'm not doing anything of animosity toward them. But if you're not showing love, you're expressing hate. That's just how that is. We must be hot. And what we have, therefore, then, and he says that, you know what, this righteous man, he does not resist you. In other words, they did nothing against you. They have not opposed you. They have not threatened you. You cannot claim self-defense here. They have not resisted you. And so there are some people within the church that they're not your enemy. And yet still you don't show love toward them. James says this is murderous. And it becomes a question of stewardship versus ownership. I think this becomes the helping factor to not do what James is warning against. And here's the difference between the two. Is that stewardship, well, we'll start with ownership. We'll go down to the end there. Ownership says, I worked for it, I bought it, it's mine. And then whenever the pastor talks about tithing, the issue of ownership says, why should I give God 10% of what I've worked for? That's ownership. Stewardship says, it's all God's. He provided the job. He provided the means to get it. He provided the access to it. I spent the money to get it, and it is still God's because it was his money from his provided job. And the issue of tithing is not, why should I give God 10% of my money? It's, why should God let me keep 90% of his money? And it's flipped around. And stewardship says, it's all God's, so how am I going to use his money? If I'm going to keep 90% of his money, what am I going to do with that 90%? How am I going to serve his creation, his kingdom, his cause? How am I serving his agenda, his will? It's an issue of stewardship. If he has allowed a place to live, it's not that it is yours, it's that it is his. And how are you going to use his environment? Because the day's going to come when Jesus will return or you die, whichever happens first, and you will be before the throne of God, and the judgment time will come, and you will not be able to say, look at all my stuff that I own, because you're going to be all by yourself with everything that you own, which is nothing. And then God's going to say, look at all the stuff that has been provided for you. What did you do with it? How have you served with it? How have you delighted with me in it? How have you advanced my kingdom? How have you been a telescope of God's glory in it? That for some people, God's glory seems far away, like a pinprick in the sky. But you can be that telescope that magnifies it and brings it to where we can see how awesome and magnificent it really is. How have you telescoped God's glory with your house, with your vehicle, with your clothes, with your food, with your internet, with your television, with your whatever it is you have? because it's God's and he has entrusted it to you. So ultimately it becomes an stewardship versus ownership issue. Here's how this looks. The unrighteous rich says they own it. The righteous rich says that they're stewards of it. They've been put in charge over it by God because it's his. The unrighteous poor says, what I own is mine, is what little I got is all mine and you can't have it. The righteous poor says, I don't have much. I have but a penny. I have but a mite, but I'm willing to use this to sacrifice for God. And Jesus has said that the woman who gave a mite because all she had was worth more than the hundreds of dollars given by the rich people because they gave out of selfishness and pride and egotism, but that poor lady gave out of sacrifice. And Jesus said her mite, her penny, was worth more than the multi-$100 check by the rich people because she sacrificed. Because she said, all I have is God's and it's his anyway, and I'm giving it to him. And I'm using it for his temple, for his glory, for his kingdom. What are you doing with your stuff? Another way of looking at it would be this. James had said last week, he said, what is life? And he said it was a vapor in the wind. That's the thing about wisdom literature. Wisdom literature asks the question, what is life? What is the purpose of life? What is the meaning of life? Those questions are asked in all wisdom literature, asked in Job, asked in Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, Book of Proverbs. And James is the only wisdom literature in all the New Testament and is asked here as well. What is the purpose of life? We discussed last week that part of that purpose was to be a telescope of God's kingdom. To be a telescope of his kingdom, to magnify and reveal, to make the most of God's glory. This week we get to add to it, to enjoy life. We get to add to it, to enjoy it, to delight in what God has given us. And this is what delight looks like. It looks like to be hospitable, to be content, and to be good stewards. That's what it means to enjoy life. So how are you doing with what you have been given? Which category are you in? It's not about rich or poor. Let's just do the general. Righteous or unrighteous. Not asking whether you're saved or unsaved. Hopefully you're saved, but the saved can still act unrighteously. It's happened a lot. So which are you doing with your stuff? Righteous or unrighteous? For God's kingdom or not for God's kingdom, but for yours? Where are you at today? Are you contributing to the chicken coop issue of the church? Or are you trying to set birds free?